You get water retention and nutrient retention. We've talked about that. So that living sponge cake, think of compost as adding the living sponge cake, the things that keep things alive and also hold on to water and hold on to nutrients, also things necessary for life. A lot of things like to live in the compost and actually can help you. So on the farm, there are several ways that we can use compost in an untraditional way. So anybody ever heard of black soldier fly larvae? Oh my goodness, black soldier fly larvae are great. They just eat and eat. If you have, like, let's say some rotten produce or whatever, you put it over here, they actually make contraptions now called biopods that will attract this fly. The female fly comes into a little hole, she smells the rotten produce, she lays her eggs on it, they hatch and they eat away and they make these little maggots, these little larvae, right? These things are great chicken food. They're like 50% fat and 30% protein or something like that, and they, when they're ready to pupate, they're like, oh, I'm done eating, and they want to climb out of there. So if you build a little ramp into this little contraption, they'll go up the ramp, and if you put a hole at the end of the ramp and put a little mason jar, boom, there's your chicken. You know, you can freeze that through the winter, that'd be a great feed. So black soldier fly larva is a way to compost. It's also a way to make chicken feed. Some people like red wiggler worms. You guys all know about red wiggler worms, right? So red wiggler worms are great. Icenia fetida. They always live in the top 2 inches of the soil, so they just consume all kinds of organic material you give them, and their waste verma castings are excellent. You can make a tea out of it, not for drinking, but you spray it on your plants, and it's really good. I won't get into verma composting so much, but believe it or not, there is an annual conference at NC State on verma composting, vermiculture farming. I think they're in their 16th year. So if you want to know more about it, it's a multi-million-dollar business right now. People are buying all kinds of worm castings. So living organisms, that's what it's all about. We need living organisms to make good compost. And we'll talk about the bacteria. That's what we're really after next. Compost can also act as a filter. It can help, it's not quite compost, but decomposers. So up on Puget Sound, I think, in Washington State, they have planted the shoreline with mushrooms, like oyster mushrooms, and some organic material, and they're letting it grow. And as water goes through it, it's cleaning it up, and their fecal coliform loading, so the bacteria you find in mammal waste, has been reduced like 70% in the sound, and it's just amazing. So you can use compost in addition to the living organisms that might live in them as biofilters that are really cheap. Because remember, the mushrooms or the mycelium will spread itself. So a little bit goes a long way and it spreads. Self-proliferating. So, okay. What do you need to make compost at home? You got your organic waste, your veggie scraps, your newspaper, which is considered a carbon. We'll talk more about that. Leaves, if they're brown, are carbon rich. If they're still fresh and green, they're rich in nitrogen. When you make a compost pile, when you make a living sponge cake compost, it's all about a balance of ingredients. So we're talking about 30 parts of carbon to 1 part nitrogen, or 15 to 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. And we'll talk about how different sources give you different things. So newspapers, which are trees, right? They're old pine trees, right? Ground up, and you want to use, try to avoid glossy inks. Just try to stick with the newspapers if you can, or brown paper. You shred it up, and that is a great bulk material that you're going to pile on top of every time you have some fresh greens, like your banana peels, your coffee grounds, dinner last night, the soggy bag of spinach. You put that on there. If you leave it open, the black soldier flies will come. But you don't want that if you're making a traditional compost pile. You want to pile it with a carbon-rich thing, like leaves that are brown or some newspaper things. We'll get into this. But these are just materials you want to start thinking about collecting. Brown or bulky materials, the carbon materials, you usually store in an area to be used when necessary. So nitrogen-rich things, coffee grounds and old produce scraps, manures, chicken manures, you want to use those as soon as they are produced in your composting operation. Well, it'll make more sense here in a second. You also need water. Your pile needs to be around 50% moisture or humidity, and it should feel like a wrung-out sponge in your hand. You need air in there, and so that's important when we start talking about how to layer your cake. If you have really fine particles like fine sawdust in there with coffee grounds, it'll compact and there's no aeration. You need a mixture of textures in your compost pile. For example, most people should start their compost pile with really thicker twigs and stuff that provide aeration from beneath. And then over time, the whole thing decomposes and the big stuff eventually breaks down. So let's see, food waste. So right now, the general number is about half of what goes into the landfill is food waste. This is amazing, first of all. And the other thing that I find striking about it is that it's a huge opportunity. There's a lot of money to be made in composting, believe it or not. So half of what goes in the landfill is organic food waste that has a better use. So that's what we're talking about. So right now, the current paradigm, food comes into the house, we have all this packaging, we throw the packaging away, and all the packaging comes from somewhere. It's petroleum-based if it's plastic, whatever. We make all this waste, we flush it out, we pay this utility bill, it's crazy. We pay someone to take our trash and haul it away, and we don't get anything out of it. I suggest we do something different. Compost at home. Take those old food scraps, half your trash bill, or think about ways you could apply composting, and now you have compost. What do you do with it? Well, you could sell it, or you could value add it. You could create greater value with that compost by growing something in it, like produce that you were going to buy anyway to eat. And we live in Zone 8. This is Wilmington, North Carolina. You can grow throughout the year down here. If you can grow compost, you can grow anything. And something to think about. So, there's people go to some amazing lengths. I know at our house it's not quite composting, but we save the lint from the dryer when we're not using the clothesline, right? And lint is a great fire starter because sometimes we have all this scrap lumber scraps that we have to burn when we're dancing around the fire. So, think of all the different ways. We have a reusable vacuum cleaner, so that whatever gets in that basket, we just dump that out in the compost pile. So think of all those things that are organic in your life that, we don't have to add to our trash bill. And, think about that, the landfill, that costs taxpayer money and hauling and all that. So, compost pile, really basically, we need some air getting in there. Oxygen feeds things like bacteria, or thermophilic bacteria. Thermo, heat, philic, loving, heat-loving bacteria. If you do composting right, you're gonna, here's the one tool. Besides my nose, the only other tool I really use is a thermometer. And also, I guess I test the moisture with my hands as well. But this is a composting thermometer, and see how long it is. That's essential, because if your compost pile is too small, you'll never do it right. There's a critical mass when it comes to making a compost pile. A general standard is a cubic yard, 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. But you can also just wrap a metal round cage. That's a really easy way to make a compost pile. But just make sure it's big enough. If you get it too big, though, you can also have some problems. Aerobic decomposition. Anyway, you stick this into the pile, and if you do it right, if you do it safe, you're supposed to get above 131 degrees for 15 days. And there's more to that. There's more standards and all that, but easily our compost piles, they're up to 155 degrees all the time. And we make a new pile about every 2 weeks. We feed ours with coffee grounds from UNCW's Wagner Hall, produce from Good Shepherd that's rotten, and horse manure from across the street, chipped woods from the Esplenda guy. So you get stockpiles of things like your wood chips. So my neighbor who's got the wood chipper truck, I say, hey man, can you drop this off over here? So I've got this giant bulk pile to always work from. And then I've got the Miss Edwards over here at the stables. I say, can I have please some of your horse manure, which costs her money to haul away? So she gives me a pile. And those are my bulk piles of carbon generally, because it's not just horse manure I'm receiving. I get the bedding. You guys been into a barn? All that bedding is really carbon rich. So if I mix the wood chips with that horse bedding and manure as I receive high nitrogen things like the coffee grounds, which I have to do every week. They make about, 100 gallons a week of coffee grounds at UNCW, and I have to make sure I, fold it into my compost pile before it gets out of control. So have your bulk browns on the side and blend them in as you get your nitrogen. Okay, let's move on. Oh, here's some other things you might find in your wonderful backyard pile. We really want the bacteria. So initially your pile will get really, really hot, you know, if you do it right. And it'll cook, and then you'll want to turn it, and it'll do this whole thing again. And you kind of want to turn it a few times. And eventually, you want it to settle or finish off or cure. And so other things are going to start to move in here, like your fungi, actinomycetes, springtails, salvigs, all these things you'll see in the pot. But as it cools off, you'll definitely get more arthropods, more bugs. Yeah?
Where is your compost?
Oh, I have pictures in here. It's in the backyard. So I have about 12 1 cubic yard bays under like a pole barn structure. And I just flip it with a big pitchfork and some volunteers. And it's great. But I'll show you, and it's it's by the airport, to answer geographically. So these are things you want to remember: temperature, aeration, moisture, particle size, and that carbon to nitrogen ratio. All right. We talked about the heat. And the high heat is also, it's very beneficial. One, it tells you it's working, but really why it's really good is it's killing pathogens. When you get above 131 degrees, that's when the people who make standards about this consider that you have achieved PFRP, something about pathogen reduction, and that's good. You want that. And also if you get it high enough too, above 150, you start really killing off weed seeds. If you get it too high though, you can damage it. If you get above 165 degrees, that can be harmful to your pile. But generally, that's not a problem. That's more of a problem at bigger compost facilities, like really big piles, not in your backyard. I don't think I've ever seen a backyard pile too hot. Yeah, so limited oxygen gives you that funky smell. So you know if you smell something bad that you need more oxygen in there, you might need bulkier carbon materials in there. Sometimes leaves have a tendency to mat, you know, but if you chip them up a little bit, that fluffs them up, and if you mix them with some twigs or other coarser materials, I don't know, like wood chips. So you don't want to turn it. This is twice a week. You don't need to turn your compost twice a week. Don't do that. That's too much work. But you can basically know when it's time to turn with your thermometer. Once the temperature starts cooling down, if it dips below 130 degrees, maybe that's time to turn it again. So use the temperature as a guide. We want to kind of keep that 50% for our moisture. If we get too dry, the bacteria start to slow down, and if we get too wet, then it starts to get anaerobic and it smells bad. We don't want that. Particle size. So, what is this telling us? The smaller it is, the hotter and quicker it will get initially. So too big, the materials won't break down and won't generate that heat. So 1 inch diameter. We try to get to particles that are 1 inch in diameter. We talked about this ratio. Does that make sense? You want to have 30 to 1 carbon to nitrogen. What does that actually mean? Well, when you make a compost pile, you're basically just going to layer things. You're going to do 2 inches, 3 inches of wood chips, 2 inches of coffee grounds, 3 inches of wood chips, 2 inches of your horse manure and bedding, and just keep making a lasagna. It's a repetitive lasagna between your carbon-rich and your nitrogen-rich stuff to make it really easy. Whew, that looks like too many numbers. Okay, so boom, PFRP. We're not quite there, actually. This looks like 129.5 degrees, so don't look at this. Okay, so carbons, your browns. Now, even though I've been talking about coffee grounds, they're brown in color, but they're actually a green when we talk about composting, because they're high in nitrogen, just to make that clarification. Okay, I was confused. Straw, great. Dry leaves, wood chips, paper. Boom. Greens, veggie scraps, fresh green leaves, fresh green grass, all those things. Let's see. Talked about our friends already. Those are good friends. Soil food web. Yeah, and I think this is always impressive. Up to 500,000 bacteria fit in a period in a book. So just think, that's the team. That's your #1 livestock on the farm. or is the bacteria? If they're not happy, no one's going to be happy because everything is from the ground up. So you want to feed the herd, or the Mongols will come and get you. Man, all right, so chemical fungi. Oh, this is another stunning fact, I think. A teaspoon, 1 teaspoon of compost has up to 14 miles of fungal hyphae in it if it's healthy soil. So that's that mycelium we were talking about. It's really small. You know, like 1/12 of the width of human hair is a lot of mycelium. It's kind of, we're talking that size, so really small. Great book, if anyone has the time. And there's an 18-minute video with Paul Stamets, 6 Ways Mushrooms Can Save the World, or his book, Mycelium Running. Oh my goodness, great book. Great book. Nematodes. Most nematodes are good. I'm sure you may have, some nematodes are very bad, but a lot of nematodes are parasitic. Well, we won't get into that. Ask Evan Folds about nematodes. If you want to talk nematodes, talk to Evan Folds there at Progressive Gardens. And very cool. So this is how a compost pile should look. We've got, our bulk brown in this case is straw. It looks like there's some manure and some kind of green foliage in there as the greens, and they're layering it. Layering it, there's a layer. And they just keep layering it, and then they top it off with maybe some finished compost that they already had. So start at the bottom with bulk coarse materials to allow air to get in there, so your thicker twigs, and then top it off if you can with the closest thing you have to finished compost, or just some bulky browns lying around. And if you do it right, you might have material that didn't decompose fully. Use that as your starting mix for your next compost pile. Those are called the overs, your leftovers. They're great because they're filled with all the things to inoculate your next pile. Here's another way you might do it, a 3-bay system, or just keep repeating this however many bays you need depending on your intake. The whole idea is you'll fill up the bay 1 with your compost pile, and it's cooking, and it drops below 130. It's time to flip it over here, start another pile. And this will heat back up again, and as your pile grows, it'll shrink. The volume will actually decrease over time, and so you might get to a point where you actually combine a couple piles, especially in the curing phase. So once you're done with the pile being hot, you'll want to let it sit for maybe 6 months. The more the time that you allow curing to happen, it won't hurt it. So, all right. So here's just more examples of things you can put in your pile. Just depends on what you got lying around. I've made several compost piles like this, or this is just a great way to collect your leaves and let them shrink down over the winter.
Could you go back to that other slide?
Sure.
Just for a minute so I could read all of it.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So coffee grounds, horse manure. And the crazy thing is, a lot of these things you can find for free if you just start, being a guerrilla gardener out there. And so this, that's to me kind of a waste of some really nice lumber. We might want to use something else there. I don't know.
That's very hard to turn.
I know, and it's very hard to turn too, gosh, right? Oh man. So yeah, open on the front. We have a 3-bay system, and we just have a pallet front door that we tie on with rope, and like every time we need to service it, and I'll show you some pictures here. So there's the vermicompost. This is great. You can start small. It doesn't smell. You can keep them in a plastic tub. Learn more about that. We don't have time today. Compost tea. Talk to Evan about this again. There's his business. Progressive Gardens. There's the black soldier fly larvae. So we talked about growing these, are the babies essentially of the mother fly. And I don't know if you can see this little line here, that's really a ramp built into this molded plastic. They will climb up, drop through a hole, and now you have self-harvesting black soldier fly larvae, protein, fat for your birds if you got chickens, or fish, or whatever. We won't talk about that. Ooh, this is a fun thing. If you got chickens, you can, they're decomposers. They're little digesting machines, and you can use them as lawnmowers. You can have a mobile cage, move them along the yard, and as they eat the grass, they also fertilize it, they eat the bugs, they scratch. So think of all the intrinsic things that these animals can do, and you can manage them across the landscape. Putting a rabbit hutch over a worm bin can double stack the livestock functions. I want to talk about that. Oh, here's some great books. Secrets of the Soil will give you a new perspective, and wonderful, wonderful book. If biodynamics, it really gets into that. Rodale Book of Composting, if you just want a nice, good comprehensive on it. Yeah, okay, compost. I think we talked about that. Oh, at NC State, every year they have a 40-hour course, compost operator training course, and it's wonderful. And it's at Lake Wheeler's campus, and you got to pay some money, but it's run by the North Carolina Composting Council, and it's just marvelous. People from all over the southeast were there, actually even further north, and they do a great job. And you get a certificate and everything. Oh, here's at the training course that I went to, each group, they split us up into groups of 5, and each group had to make a pile. And we had to make sure our pile got hot enough, and so this was us monitoring the temperature. All of us made it. We could all graduate. It was fabulous. We all got above the magic line. So there's your high-tech compost tools I showed you. They also have here something called I think this is like a relative humidity probe or something, so you don't really need that. You've got your hands or whatever, any part of your body. Stick it in there. All right, so here's how they do it on the big scale. So, star screens shredders. This is one way that they tear up yard waste on the big scale. So there's something. And I think the county actually rents the tub grinder. So here's a tub grinder. So every time we have a hurricane, for example, the county doesn't own this equipment, so we rent it from, I think, Mr. Thompson. And that stuff comes in there. They grind it up. That stuff's out there now. I think you can drop off yard waste at the landfill for free now, right? And they have a giant pile of mulch there. But now we're trying to talk about compost, which is very different than mulch. So these are just some big technology. Okay, so this is a windrow turner. So sometimes they make long, giant rows of organic matter. This is the Yard Waste Center in Raleigh, and they actually have a machine that turns that compost pile. But this is now the old way. The new way is to actually compost in place in something called a aerated static pile. They actually make a compost pile and they force air through it. Either they blow through it, they suck it through, and it's through a pipe underneath the pile. And you can really turn a compost pile over quickly that way now. But so there's some curing stations at the Yard Waste Center in Raleigh. Some stockpiles. Okay, so compost, just to be sure, is not mulch, right? Mulch is just what we use to maybe suppress weeds, retain moisture, cover stuff. It's usually undecomposed coarse brown materials like pine bark and stuff like that, straw. Night soil, okay, so that's undecomposed, maybe human manure. Well, not human manure, but human waste. Or even, you can think around here, a big thing is pig waste, raw application of pig waste. So it's not fully decomposed animal waste. That's not compost. Compost is not an amendment. It's not a fertilizer, but it promotes fertility by holding on to nutrients. So it's no good. You can go out and buy all the fertilizer in the world, but if your soil has no humic matter in it, it won't hold on to it. So you need the sponge first before you invest. And really, the sponge, once it's there, it starts to accumulate and search out the nutrients it needs. So this is at the Raleigh yard. It's hard to read here, but basically you can drop off for $30 a ton any organic matter you want, and then you can buy organic matter or finished compost for $30 a cubic yard on the way out. Some facilities actually give away the compost for free. I think Southport or somewhere in Brunswick County you can get some pretty decent stuff for free. It's not truly finished, but so compost can go into raised beds, which is a great way to get started if you're fresh onto a site. There's some cool raised beds in Ogden. UNCW's doing it. David Brenner's doing it back there. This is in my greenhouse at one point. Oh, at one point we were using compost to heat the greenhouse, and now we're going to something called a rocket mass heater. This thing was 10 feet tall, 10 feet wide, and it had this 1-inch PEX pipe running around it. And we forced water through the pipe. It would heat up. It was 150 degrees for 18 months in the middle of that pile. And we'd run that heat through this channel here and then into the greenhouse where there's 8 tables, and on every table there's a tiny little spaghetti EPDM plastic tubing that heats the table radionically from the bottom. So hot water that's in a closed circuit was heated by just passing through the pile, not touching the pile, just passing through, and then it would go into the greenhouse and heat the transplants from the ground up, which in a greenhouse is a big deal. If you heat the air in a greenhouse, you're wasting money. It can be 15 degrees colder in the air. What you want is the soil temperature right. If that's right, you get germination. So soil temperature more important than air temperature in a greenhouse. Well, depending on what you're growing, I guess, but for transplant. So this is in my pole barn. So I went out, I did have an expense here when I bought all these tubs, but I was working with UNCW, so I wanted to look good, I guess, or look better than just beat up trash cans. So I got these nice 32-gallon brutes on wheels, put my name on it, and where they would have previously were just throwing all the coffee grounds into a black plastic bag mixed with all other things. Now we're separating. We keep the trash separate, and I haul away just coffee grounds with maybe the filter in there, and that's my green material. That's the bulk of my green material. And each one of these stalls is just framed out with a pallet, and very, very simple. It is covered though, because you know how it rains around here. You don't want to get your pile so saturated. You want to control the moisture of your piles, so keep them covered. Also a tarp will do, so you can just get a tarp. What is that? Oh, we have a really cool tool that we developed in all of this, the pallet breaker. They're for sale if you ever, I got some business cards. But it's old steel, but we welded it. It's like a angle iron, and it rolls on another 1-inch pipe down here, and these 2 flanges basically lift up. And we can use all these boards now. We make, things from beehives to pallet tumblers that, well, we need to make a new one of that. Ooh, so at the landfill, they have all the pallets in the world. If you were wondering, where do I get pallets? Landfill.
Will they give those to you?
They will if you start being nice. And
I got it made.
A new thing. Huh?
Yeah, but there is a place. They have a poured pad out there called their construction and demolition diversion pad, and it's a gold mine. And you can find a lot of things out there. I think there is, technically they have a rate, like $1 a ton or whatever you pull out, but if you contact, Lynn Bestel or Joe Suleiman, the director, Sam Halls, it's New Hanover County. You guys are paying taxes. You can contact these people. It's okay. They're nice. And so all those things are available out there. And now what we're trying to do is work with, is that Heather Collegian out there on a cold January? I think it is. And Sabrina Woofter and Kat Pullman. So these are some good folks. There's Dave Sylvia. We're trying to convince the landfill to get into composting because it helps the landfill. One, it diverts stuff out of the landfill. It keeps the landfill alive longer. It provides a revenue stream for the landfill. And what do you make out of it? You get compost, which we can put all over the county in strategic places to start community change. But it takes organization, but it makes sense to do it at the landfill, right? Because everything's already going to the landfill. They have scales there, they have the equipment. And sure enough, the landfill is behind this, and it looks like they're considering a construction on a pilot facility that will look exactly like what they've done at Appalachian State, where they have a pilot aerated static pile compost facility. I don't have a picture of that, but there's the C&D waste pad. Oh yeah, we grew that bok choy, and that's a root beer bottle there for comparison, right? And that was grown entirely with compost. U.S. Composting Council. They are the parent organization of the North Carolina Composting Council. And here locally, we've just kind of a grassroots thing now called the Coastal Composting Council. We meet, once a month on the 3rd Thursday. So check that out. And so as far as the pilot program at the landfill, UNCW will be involved, Cape Fear Community College, and right now we've got Holly Tree Elementary and Wrightsboro Elementary School are going to start diverting their organic waste, and we're going to compost it. And if it works, we're gonna expand it to, hopefully the whole school system, where we've got 43 schools or something like that in the school system. So, and then what does that mean? Well, those schools get compost, right? And then they can grow at the school, and they can learn about food better in a way that they're very removed from, and that would be a whole nother 5-hour conversation. But I just put these ideas up here. Maybe think about, looking at these projects. We're also doing, so there's farmers markets at some of these Wilmington Housing Authority properties where they're starting to build gardens. And so maybe that's a great place for education outreach from an organization like the Master Gardeners to, start promoting compost and involvement in that way. So I'll stop there. I think I'm right at time, but we should